I'm excited because I think this topic, in terms of what we're going to talk about, when you have a disagreement or conflict with someone and it turns really ugly and the other person just unleashes on you and hits below the belt and is out to destroy you, particularly as two adults, what the hell are you supposed to do? And just to kick it off, as both of you know, I got into a family dispute with my sister a few weeks ago. And I think the reason why is irrelevant. I mean, family squabbles, fights are so common. But what threw me off during this particular incident was the fact that she unleashed the beast. She just was out to destroy me in terms of wanting to win. It became a situation of egos and who's right versus who's wrong, and it became so heated and emotional that she was just willing to try to kill me, really, in terms of using words, throwing things in my face. And long story short, the highlights that I was able to glean from this argument was the fact that she said to my face that for her entire life, I was not the number one go-to person in terms of talking about problems and issues that are very deep and profound, that she has a circle of friends that she relies on more than me, her one and only sibling.
Wow.
And then she also said that you have a history of just shunning people, dropping people, cutting people out of your life. And just to give you a backstory, after our initial blow up, she tried to placate the situation by sending me texts, trying to call me, and essentially trying to sweep things under the rug. I never received an apology. And I was still fuming that I didn't respond. And then when we finally were able to reconnect, she said something along the lines of, not only was I not her number one go-to person, but also the fact that she is in disbelief that I dropped her, because I have a history of getting into conflicts with people and just dropping them, dismissing them, cutting them out of my life. And she can't believe that out of all those people, you did this to me, your sister.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's a lot to unpack right there.
And we haven't spoken since. I also think she was totally taken aback by the fact that I stood up, because I think particularly developing this friendship with two amazingly intelligent and insightful and honest ladies who are very respectful when giving opinions and criticisms. I don't want to use the word criticisms, but different points of view. When she
diplomatic as usual.
Diplomatic, that's the word.
Korean of you.
Diplomatic. She couldn't believe that I stood up to her, that I wasn't willing to bow down, because going back to trends and history and behavior patterns, she is one, and she learned this from our parents, very moody, projecting onto you, very emotional, hot-headed, high-strung. And just to give the both of you an example, I'll call her, and if she's having a bad day, I can't talk to you right now. And then never offering an apology, calling the next day being like, why are you mad? What's wrong? You're too sensitive. Everyone has bad days. Yes, everyone has bad days, but I make the choice not to project that onto an innocent bystander. So I know I just unloaded a lot, but I am dying to hear your perspectives and also your stories in terms of encountering a situation like this with either a family member or a loved one, a dear friend, and how you've handled these situations. And what are we supposed to do going forward? What do you recommend I do in terms of this situation that clearly is very hurtful to me and for her as well, I'm sure?
There's several things. So first of all, like, yes, I want to validate the way you feel and just, sit there beside you, what you experience, especially from a family member. And hearing things like that, I think, is extra hurtful, especially from a family member. I think those things are just need time before you can even like address them, because it's just that like that feeling, from the family. So I just want to acknowledge that from the beginning. And, I think it has to be when you're ready to even just discuss it. And it's not even about right or wrong or being able to approach someone, but being able to be stable and process within your own self. And sometimes that takes time, and it could take, a length of time and a lot of time. So I just want to, I cut off certain people because of that. And part of me was like, I couldn't have conversations. And some I started having conversations. So it really, I think there's so much history that goes along with that pain. It's not just this one time. There's this history of all of that, and all the times you were there for that person and they weren't there for you, and now they're throwing it in your face, like, so I just want to like acknowledge that for you. Like there's that, first and foremost.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
I know, Jenny, I feel
yeah.
like you probably are going through a lot of emotions on your end when you hear this. I think with family members, it's a little different because there's like always, like I do this to my family and my family does that to me as well. It's a two-way street. Is we always felt like we can throw our true emotions at our family members, which I think like this is like sometimes I think yeah, but sometimes I also think it's not the right way. There's also a balance. I know with friends, with friends and like coworkers, you definitely are not going to throw these type of words at each other unless it's like a really close friend and you're pissed at each other. So but that's like a degree of like a very
That's
real
close
friend.
as family. Yeah. That's coming.
Right. And I feel like that boundary is mostly not clear for I would say, make generally, like everyone. And that's where like the hard balance that comes in. Like, I think you probably are cooling off from the conversation. When you first heard it, you probably are in shock and you're very disappointed. You very hurt outside by the comments. I myself sometimes I get talked like in this way too by my mom, and it just felt she doesn't feel anything because she's not the receiving end of that. But I felt it very deeply, and I think in that moment I kind of just walked away. I walk away from her comments, but what I would say if and which I need to also get better at with my mom is when that emotion has, passed, when that emotion passes, I want to let her know this is making me really painful. This is not to put a guilt in her, but it's more of sharing, hey, what you said made a damage in me, and I don't know if that damage can be repaired. It's gonna stay with me on whatever comment you made. And I think that's the most painful part of family members and talking this way, is that these words are like hard to take back, and it's always reflected on whenever on a moving forward basis. So I would, unless two parties are willing to come together
Yes.
on the same level to resolve this, I would say, like whether that's resentment or conflict together in a peaceful way.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard because I think ego comes in the way, and I
Yes.
think some family member just does not know how to balance their own emotions or process these type of things.
Yes.
And that's why
So
to like chime in here because I really
yes, I want to add, I think there's a family element here that it took me a very long time, because I had a very contentious relationship with my family, and it's gotten better over the years, and it goes back and forth in moments. So over the time, what I've learned is also something through conversations with my sister, it opened my eyes to another perspective that I wasn't looking, and it's outside of mine. Growing up in a family that where the parents do it to the children and the grandparents did it to the parents, there is a certain dynamics of family behavior that's what people know, and that's their go-to behavior. So
Yes.
even if they don't want to be certain ways, they sometimes may not recognize or realize, specifically for our family dynamics. They may be differently outside of the family, or they may still be the same, but there is a dynamic in the family that to them is part of like love. When a parent does it to a child, as a child, you do it to you who you love too. Like, not, that's just how you process information in that dynamics at such a young age. So in their minds, they don't see anything wrong with that, because that's like, oh no, that's how we are. Like, I'm sure you've heard people like my kids,
Yes.
like they look nasty to each other, and I hate it. And they're like, no, you don't get it, Mom. That's how we are. And I was like, no. Even that's how you are. You don't speak like that to another person. Like, there's.
And I think that what you just said is so powerful, and something about maturity and awareness that most people, let's face it, don't have, because it's so ingrained in them, and it's passed down from generation to generation, that it's kind of like they don't see it as anything wrong, because it's kind of like normalized, that behavior, even though they themselves know with time that it's wrong, that it's hurtful, that they have trauma, that they'll never forget what was said to them. It's kind of like they just keep repeating those very toxic behaviors. And obviously this is a very sad situation for me, but on the flip side, I'm very proud of myself, because I just told her, I'm not accepting, this is not acceptable.
Yeah. So I had a very tough relationship. I was very angry with my sisters, their behavior, like feeling my parents treated us very poorly or terribly, but as sisters, we should have supported each other. They didn't support me. And that was really hurtful to me. But then as I got older, and I just started being more vocal about with myself. So I became very vulnerable to my sisters, and in return, it made them open up in their relationship. And over time, I got to understand what they experienced in those moments when I was like, how come they weren't there for me? They had their own issues that I wasn't even aware of. I thought I was like, we're all in the same house, like, you know. And even like the other day, my sister told me something, and I was like, I had no idea you had that growing up. That was so inappropriate for a child to have to go through. Just, that was a very mature and emotional responsibility to put on someone that young.
Yeah.
And it opened up my eyes. So like when I came in a better state and showed up for myself and being able to articulate where I was coming from and what I was doing about it, it opened the door for my sister there was a disarming where she felt supported. She felt a bit understood. And that really bridged our gap in our relationship and has helped us get closer and closer. And then like she started calling me and offering to me, you know, where I was doing it mostly first, you know, and now, and then what was really like the biggest eye opener when she shared with me what it meant and felt like for her, the things we went through, I had no clue about that. Like, and it made so much sense to me.
Mm-hmm. See, I think it's
but like, I wasn't ready to have this conversation. It took me time, you know.
Right, of course.
Time. I think that's the word, time. You need to give time when two parties are maturing enough at that level to have that kind of conversation, which it's always challenging. Sister to sister might be a little easier, Tova. I think like a mom to a child, it's maybe a lot harder. It takes, I'm just thinking like from my personal perspective and my mom's perspective, it probably takes my mom a lot to kind of step down to be on the same level as what I'm like thinking, and for her to admit her problems and issues and things like that. So that's why it's hard for me to get some of the tension resolved.
Mm-hmm. And have you, now that you're a grown adult, have you had a chance, or have you had a desire to talk to your mother about this issue, or is it still very painful or perhaps sensitive, or perhaps she's very stuck in her ways?
I think she's stuck in her own ways, and then like she's not changing. And I do think my mom is the type of person that she's unable, when you throw like logic back at her argument, then she knows that she's wrong. She start talking, like she start pulling in other things that's irrelevant to this subject, which is the, you know, the typical
defensive, right?
Right, she's a typical family move, and when she starts saying that and she starts pointing at me like, you are being defensive, you are the person who wants to win all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, we're just talking about this subject and let's not talking about other subject. We can parking lot that one and then we come back to visit. So I have to like ground her a little in terms of that, because like parents and family likes to go off tangent and start talking about something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the
Yeah.
escalation, where the escalation that starts. So it's still very hard and challenging. I'm still trying to figure out ways to manage myself and manage her. I would say it's not easy. Like I try to, and when she's in a better mood, she's in a good mood, then I kind of like sometimes I'll mention it, or like in opportunities where she made a mistake, and I kind of pop that in right there. It's in the back of my mind, and it's perfect timing for me to pop that in and remind her like this is what you did, and I don't think like it happens to you, and well I put it like don't act like you're a saint as well.
Mm-hmm. Then
Yeah. Sorry, go
the
ahead.
question I have is, are you close with your mother, or like have these incidences really taken a toll on your relationship?
I'm close to her, but I also am not that close to her.
Hmm.
Like we're not. I'm not talking heart to heart with her. She's still trying to figuring me out in terms of what I'm thinking. But like in terms of daily interactions, yes, we're close. We talk, but it's never on like a deeper level. So yes and no.
Okay, so very, I don't just want to say Asian, I think it's very typical of many families when you have a parent and a child.
Yeah,
Regardless of whether this child is an adult, they still treat you like a child.
yeah. And I really don't think like as I'm growing up, as I mature, I really don't think my mom has. Maybe it's too arrogant for me to say it like that. I don't think my mom has my way of maturity in terms of like controlling myself and controlling my own emotions. And like she would like the more and more I interact with her as an adult, and I feel like more things that I can see clearly, that's a weakness to her, that she's unable to process sometimes her own emotions, and she has to take it out somewhere else and things like that. So as I get mature, as I get old, I start figuring her out more and her patterns.
Yeah, I think our parents, there are some limitations they have. I think there's so much where it might be too painful for them to even go. I think it's very common when you're trying to have a conversation with someone of explaining when you behave this way, it made me feel this way, as wanting to be informative and open yourself up to them, where they
Yeah,
become very defensive. So it's really important for that disarming language. It makes me feel this way versus you did this to me. That's the change in language where they could hear it more. But again, then there's also limitations. I had a conversation with my mom about some of the things and she just walked away. She made a choice not to talk about it. So like, as much as I want to, at a very surface relationship, like, hi, how's it going? You're okay. You need this, that. But like, I'm not that close. She's not my go-to when it comes to that. And it's because of how she treats me. And I can't create that bond by the fact of the behavior creates the distance.
yeah,
Takes two to tango.
yeah,
There has to be a mutual respect.
I want to add that where I changed was I made myself vulnerable to my family, my mom, my sisters, my brothers. Only my sisters responded back. My mom walked away. My brothers got uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
and they just like went, okay. And then like that was it. And where my sisters and I got to grow closer as a result of that, where I was like you said, this behavior, like you explained in the podcast, and what we've all experienced, a version of that, where I said, I'm not taking that anymore. I'm not living that way, and I'm going to respond differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask differently. I'm going to, state and put myself out there differently. And I did. And it took some warming up for my sisters, but they did come. The rest did not.
Mm-hmm.
hmm
Which leads me to ask, are do you think you're being too harsh? Because there's also a school of thought that thinks, well, your family or your close friends, you've known each other for your entire lives or decades, you have all of this history together. How can you just throw that away? Or like your family, you're bound by blood forever. How can you just cut the ties? Are you selfish?
So there's doing the right thing, and then there's also what's in my best interest in protecting myself. So if my brother called me and said, I need your help, I'm stuck, I need a ride, I will do the ride. When my father was in the hospital and he was in a coma, I stepped up as a daughter. Again, this is the right thing to do. It's a father and daughter relationship. We're a family. We step up for family. So in those instances, absolutely, I will always step up for my family, whether they deserved it or not. But how I put myself available, how I give myself back on an ongoing basis in a relationship, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like when my mom gets sick and she needs a ride to the doctor or someone, between me and my sisters, I'm going to have to do it. I know that, and I'll do it gladly.
It's very transactional. Like it will be like
and
more
again, and it's also more about, for me, like they're still a parent, they're still a sibling, how I want to live my life. Like, I would want my children to see that and be that way, the example I want to set. So even me doing it, it's more for me than for them also.
Just to share an example of something that happened to me in the past that I think probably traumatized me for the rest of my life and really put me on guard when approaching friendships or any sort of relationships, was the fact that I had a friend throughout high school and college who was like a sister to me. And she, very similar to a previous podcast episode that Cleo talked about with her friend, she was in a toxic relationship. And all of a sudden, all the conversations, all of our interactions became about this guy. I don't recall exactly what I said, but I clearly said something that just pushed her over the edge. And instead of coming to me and being like, hey, what you said during this conversation about this guy, it bothers me, let's talk about it. She sent me, and of course, she didn't have the courage to say any of this to my face. She all of a sudden sent me this very long email filled with bold letters, caps, exclamation marks. But long story short, these are the takeaways I had. And clearly it's like ingrained in my mind after decades. She said, I was never really her friend. I never was able to provide her with what she was looking for because I just didn't have the capacity to understand her. She felt sorry for me and other things along those lines. And I was so devastated. I couldn't believe it. And I just let it go. I was like, clearly, this person saying these scathing things to me, either on paper, because she didn't have the fucking courage to say it to my face. I don't want someone like this in my life. Because clearly, they're going to do it once, they're going to do it again.
So that's where I was like, the conversation of opening up and seeing where it lands with that person, and also being in a space where you're ready to do that, I think are very important points in any of this. If you want to take the relationship, again, ultimately it's your choice, in any relationship.
So you won't believe this. A year later, I was working in Midtown by Rockefeller Center, and my desk was by the call center, like the 1-800 number for the office. And I was friends with those guys because our desks were close by. And one afternoon, one of them comes to me and says, hey, there's someone on the phone for you, like asking if you're in the company directory. Like, should I let this person claims like you're her friend and she knows you work here and she wants to know if I would transfer the call to your line. And of course, it was the the person who sent that email. I just remember feeling so sick to my stomach, like I don't know what to do. My eyes were welling up with tears, and I was like transferred, but I didn't pick up the phone. I was just like, what is she going to say? What mess will she leave a message? And then the old office phones where the red light would appear.
Goes off.
Leaves a voicemail, and the red light came on, and I just grabbed the receiver and listened to the message, and it was essentially like, "Oh, hi. Maybe I bet you're surprised that you received this message, but I remember like this is where you work, and I called the 1-800 number. But anyway, I just like you're on my mind. You've been on my mind, like all of a sudden, and I'm thinking about you so much, and like I'm wondering how you're doing, and I just thought that I would call and like I'm living on the Upper West Side, and here's my number in case like you want to talk. And but I understand if you don't want to, but I'm just putting it out there. I hope you're well. And of course I was like, fucking bitch, piece of shit, like the voodoo dolls. Wishing this person.
I can totally see Jenny going, that piece of shit. Fuck her.
Fuck you. And I made the conscious decision not to, because for the sake of my mental health, clearly I was still hurting and devastated. And as I said, I will never trust this person again, because this person made a conscious choice to take all of that history and throw it out the window and come after me to destroy me.
Yeah.
Would there be a world where it exists if she called with an apology or she owned her behavior? Would you have a different?
That is very different.
Yeah.
That is very different. This voicemail did not say, I'm sorry, and perhaps that's why she left her number. She wanted to apologize. But after a year, it's not acceptable. Am I being too harsh?
I think in the moment that you were very hurt, I think that was the right decision, in that moment. Because when you look at it years later, like, like when you take the emotion out and you look at the logic. So I'm not coming from a place of judgment. I'm coming from, when you're in an emotional state, it's not. When you're in a logical state, all of a sudden you could see the difference of what something is and isn't. And I think, and this is going back to what I said earlier, like when you're able to take that out and process it through and feel ready, you may never be ready, but there are going to be times where you are then. You can look back. And that's part of the conversation too. I know you called. I know you could, maybe that was your version of an apology, but it wasn't enough for me. And I needed more, and I needed more time. And you're entitled to have that emotion and feeling. So to say, was it too harsh? Who am I or any of us to say what you should or shouldn't be? Like, I don't have that right, and no one else does. And that's how I firmly believe,
I agree with that. Because, like, Jenny, when you're speaking, I'm just thinking about, like, in my head and my story with my friend. Last time we talked about divorcing a friend. We have not spoken. And in August, that's going to be an entire year. We're not too far from August. So I'm just thinking, like, I told you, I spoke to you offline about it. When I was in China, like, there was like a few moments that I'm like, maybe I should reach out. Maybe I should like connect with her to see what's going on. But something's pausing me. Whether that's my ego, whether that's like something else. But I think mainly, I'm just to be very honest, I think mainly is the ego. And also the other aspect is, why am I reaching out? Because I don't felt like I'm the person at fault. By and large.
Well,
right?
I think this goes back to it takes two to tango. And if it's become, and this is, I think, very pertinent to the two stories I shared during this podcast, it becomes the battle of wills.
Yeah.
And when both parties are like, I'm right, you're wrong, you should reach out, no, you should reach out. If it doesn't break and if it's really worth salvaging, someone's going to reach out eventually. And the reason why I think I bring up this story, and perhaps I'm being too sensitive too, and I think this goes back to, am I being too harsh or sensitive? We all have emotions. We all get angry. We all have the slip of the tongue. But for someone to just go off on you and just have a serialized barrage of hurtful things, and there's no apology.
And again, going back to like, is it my ego? Is it too hard? Like only you could, answer that for yourself, really. And it's also, what do you want at the end of the day? Do you want to be right? Do you want to be validated, vindictive? Like what is it? Do you want your sister back? Do you want your friendship back? Do you just say these are just for my own mental, health?
Yeah.
I can't do things like that. Like, and I think that really helps answer of like, well, what is it that you want? Where do you want to be? What's the lifestyle you want around you? Do you want to live in peace? Do you want,
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people where I said, if I don't call them, will I ever hear from them? And guess what? I never did. So there you go.
Well, that to me is also indicative, like you're not worthy enough to them to pick up the phone and call you.
But as a tell, it let me know. And I was like, you know what? Not worth my time. Right? Like,
I think for me also my experiences, and these are just obviously two examples, makes me very aware of people's personalities. And if I know, for instance, that someone is capable, and if we were to get into some sort of disagreement, will like just take the knives out and cut me. I've also been in situations where I see your behavior, I see your personality, I see you doing this to other people, and I don't want you in my life because I don't want to be your next target.
Kind of going back, Jenny, I'm just curious, kind of going back to the sister story that you're having. What have you done lately in terms of the way how you're thinking about it, or your thoughts about how to like approach her?
Well, I think as Tova said, it's time.
Yeah.
Because we only have each other. It's kind of like the relationship is even more urgent to maintain the relationship. And ideally I would like an apology, but I know I won't get it.
I'm just so curious if like just for like a testing how she would react, and just maybe on a text or even a call up to you, like just be very vulnerable, like in just addressing how you felt. Like
Well,
I really want to try this method with my mom, but I know what I somewhat kind of expect what she would react, but
so the last conversation we had was an actual like blow up, was the cat fight. And I started bawling. She did not. She you know how, and I think this is common of many families, but particularly Asian families, and I don't want to speak for your family, but for me, the way I grew up, if you cried, it was a big no-no. And so I was crying, I was bawling, I was sticking up for myself, I was trying very hard to have her see my perspective, but it became the battle of ego. No, I'm not going there. No, you can't tell me what to do. And then that's when the knives started flying.
Yeah. That really just needs time. I think reason why she contact you, like reach out to you via text, and think that's where she realized, like she went she went a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
And when she doesn't get reactions and she's pissed off and she starts saying like other things, like that's why you cut people off and things like that. I just don't know how, I don't know how like people are handling these type of emotions well, like especially from Asian family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
There's a lot
that's,
of history, yeah.
yeah. Like I don't know if Asian family has the capability to do that. Like I feel like reflection and apology is not somewhat a thing. It might be American thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
But on that note, I appreciate the conversation, insightful and valuable as always. I agree with you. It'll probably be time. I don't think I'll ever receive an apology, but unfortunately, the the things that were uttered, as I was telling Cleo offline, I will take this to my grave. Like the relationship has been changed
yeah,
forever,
yeah.
and unless I get an apology,
No,
and
do you ever listen to Esther Perel when she talks about relationships of coming back from cheating?
I'm
It's very similar. Like once there's a deception, a deep hurt, the relationship changes. You create a new relationship, or you could change. If you decide to be back in each other's life, but it's a whole nother relationship again, and I think that's correct. Like,
And I think that's why, going back to what I was, my own self assessment, because I've been the recipient, and I'm not saying I'm an angel, I'm sure I've pissed people off too. I think it's human, right?
Yeah.
But I'm certainly very aware. And before things get to that point, I would rather walk away. I would just, if one of you, for instance, or someone else were to say something nasty to me and cut me and hit under the belt, I'd be like, made a mental note. I'm sure you would apologize, but it's kind of like, well, it's changed, and
I've said things afterwards, and I'm like, oh, I can't take that back. I know I've been there. What's wrong with me?
we've all done it. We've all done it, but I think for me, and in terms of my own self development and awareness, I don't want to be that person. So I would just rather walk away from that type of confrontation. Very similar to my divorcing a friend, where we both didn't want to have the cat fight because it would get ugly and nasty, and we just walked away. And I think some people would think, well, that's very counterproductive, but I feel like when the writing is on the wall, just walk away. I don't want to be that person where someone says to me, gosh, she really damaged me in an emotional tirade. I don't want to be that person.
Yeah, I can respect that.
All right, ladies, amazing conversation as always. Any last minute words?
I think, yeah, time. I hope when I get, as I age more and more, I have the maturity and the gut to sit down with my mom and have those very productive conversation. I might not even ever achieve that, but that's the goal.
Yeah. And also being the person who's like, you know what? Let me get over my ego.
Yeah.
And when I'll be the one who's, initiates it. Do I have to? I was the one wrong. Again, it's what do you want at the end of the day? What really matters to you at the point at that point.
At that point. I think my final words consist of having self-respect, and if you feel like it's the best, instead of having this knockdown, ugly mess confrontation, it's okay to walk away.
Yeah.
It's okay to take the higher ground and be like, I'm not going to retaliate by hitting you under the belt too.
Yeah,
I agree.
And at the end of, as long as you are okay with that decision, and also, is this friendship or relationship really, do you want to have someone like this in your life?
Absolutely.
Is it really worth it?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
So
with that,
great.
Yes, we have to do it more often.
Yes, I need more. I need more.
And until then, hope both of you have a great weekend.
You too.
All right.
Talk to you later, girls. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.